This is Dr. Fox, and let's talk about the eye. In this video, we'll discuss the basic layers and supporting apparatus of the eyeball and its various components. The eye most efficiently can be described as consisting of 3 layers or tunics surrounding an inner part. These 3 layers include, from most superficial to deep, the fibrous layer, which consists of the sclera and cornea. The fibrous layer is largely structural, but it does have a refractory component to it of the cornea, which we'll see. The next layer is the vascular layer, also known as the uvea. This is an important layer for how light is transmitted and refracted through the eyeball, and also is where the vasculature of the eye is located. And then the deepest layer, or the nervous layer, aka the retina, consists of all of the special sensory receptors, the rods and cones and interneurons that are able to receive light information and make sense of it on its way back to the brain for interpretation. These 3 layers surround an inner part whose most important constituent is the lens, which is acted upon by that vascular layer, as well as a large gelatinous mass posterior to it, which helps support the shape of the eye, known as the vitreous humor or vitreous body. So let's start with the fibrous layer and work our way in. The 2 main constituents of the fibrous layer include the sclera and the cornea. The cornea is the anterior-most part of the eye, which we can see there. And then the sclera is everything else superficial surrounding that. The sclera is known as the white of the eye, and it's an important insertion site for various extraocular as well as intrinsic muscles of the eye. The cornea is more anterior than the sclera. Unlike the sclera, the cornea is transparent, and so light is transmitted through the cornea. It's actually the main refractive index for the eye. It is completely avascular, so there are no blood vessels in the cornea, so it's very slow to heal if injured, and it is extraordinarily sensitive to touch. So if you're not a fan of anything in your eye or sensitive to that, you have the cornea to thank for that. And if you've ever had a scratched cornea like I have, boy howdy, you have my greatest sympathies. The next deepest layer is the vascular layer, also known as the uvea, which has 3 major components to it: the iris, the ciliary body, and the choroid. That iris is, if you can imagine this sort of all the way through, so not sectioned, is a diaphragm that sits deep to the cornea, anterior to the lens. It is the pigmented part of the anterior eye that we can see. So if you have blue or green or brown or hazel or some unique eye color, that's complements of the iris. And the iris works as a diaphragm that determines how much light is passed through to the lens. And the whole of the diaphragm is known as the pupil. So that pupil, or the hole in the diaphragm, or the probably more technically correct, the aperture, is what appears black to an individual looking. And so that pupil is going to either constrict So if we start with this, it will either constrict to get more narrow, or it will dilate to get larger. With constriction, less light is transmitted to the lens. With dilation, more light is transmitted to the lens. And the actions of the iris are complements of various intrinsic eye muscles known as the pupillae muscles. So there are two sets. There are sphincter pupillae muscles and dilator pupillae muscles. Sphincter pupillae muscles, as the name might suggest, makes the pupils more narrow. So it constricts or contracts the pupil. Sphincter pupillae muscles are under the control of the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system. Preganglionic parasympathetic fibers coming from the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 3, which we'll discuss. So with parasympathetic stimulation, the pupils are going to constrict or get smaller, whereas the dilator pupillae muscles are going to dilate the pupils, make them larger, letting in more light, and these are under sympathetic control. And those fibers are coming from the superior cervical ganglion of the sympathetic trunk, which serves all of the head. So posterior to the iris is the ciliary body. The ciliary body contains the ciliary muscles and is an attachment site for specialized fibers which anchor the lens in place. This ciliary body also contains specialized cells which are going to secrete aqueous humor as well as portions of the vitreous humor. More posteriorly, the vascular layer is known as the choroid, and this is very rich with blood vessels and dark with pigment, also from blood of those vessels. It tends to be the thinnest part of the posterior eye. As we move more posteriorly, that vascular layer tends to thin out, and that leaves the deepest part of the wall of the eye, the nervous layer or the retina. This nervous layer consists of 10 separate layers of specialized photoreceptors, both rods and cones, as well as ganglion cells, interneurons, etc. And the axons from the ganglion cells of the retina are going to exit together and coalesce as the optic nerve or cranial nerve 2. So that's the special sensory nerve that conducts all of the special senses of sight back to the brain. Contained within the optic nerve is the central retinal artery, which is a branch of the ophthalmic artery. Both the optic nerve and the ophthalmic artery are going to be conducted through the optic canal of the sphenoid bone. So that's how they are transmitted between the cranial cavity and the orbit. And that leads us to the assessment question of this video, and that is, during a fight or flight response, what happens to the pupils? Do the pupils dilate or do they narrow? Well, during a fight or flight response, sympathetic fibers from the superior cervical ganglia moved through paravascular plexuses, so internal carotid, through the ophthalmic artery, out to service the dilator pupillae muscles, which are going to dilate the pupils to let more light in. So during a sympathetic response, the pupils get large. During a parasympathetic response, they narrow. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll talk to you in